Just hours ago, everything changed. A ballistic missile screamed across the skies from Yemen, air raid sirens shattered the silence in Beersheba, and the entire Middle East conflict just escalated to a terrifying new level because the Houthis have officially entered this war. What I am about to tell you will reshape your understanding of this conflict, because this is no longer a war between Israel, America, and Iran. This is now a regional conflagration that threatens to engulf the entire Middle East and beyond. Today, I want to walk you through exactly what happened in the last 24 hours, why the Houthis chose this precise moment to strike, and what this means for the future of global security, because we are witnessing history unfold in real time. Let me start with the breaking news that has military analysts around the world on high alert. The Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen launched a ballistic missile directly at southern Israel, triggering air raid sirens across Beersheba and surrounding communities in the Negev desert. This is the first Houthi attack on Israel since the current war began on February 28, and it signals a dramatic expansion of the conflict that American and Israeli military planners were desperately hoping to avoid. The Israeli Defense Forces confirmed that they successfully intercepted the incoming missile using their advanced air defense systems. No casualties were reported, but the psychological impact of this attack cannot be overstated. What I am seeing right now is the nightmare scenario that Pentagon officials have warned about for weeks. Iran's proxy network is activating, turning a bilateral conflict into a multi-front regional war. The Houthis are not some ragtag militia operating in isolation. They control significant territory in Yemen, possess sophisticated Iranian-supplied weapons, and have demonstrated their ability to strike targets thousands of kilometers away. Their slogan tells you everything you need to know about their ideology: death to America, death to Israel, and a curse on the Jews. This is a movement driven by religious fervor and unwavering loyalty to Tehran. Let me give you the context that mainstream media often ignores. The Houthis first began attacking Israel and international shipping back in November 2023, 1 month after the October 7th Hamas massacre. Since then, they have launched dozens of ballistic missiles and drones at Israeli territory, forcing the IDF to maintain constant vigilance on yet another front while fighting in Gaza and confronting Hezbollah in Lebanon. But here is what makes today's attack so significant. Since the October 2025 ceasefire with Hamas, the Houthis had gone completely silent, holding their fire against Israel for months. That silence has now been shattered, and the timing is absolutely not coincidental. The Houthis warned repeatedly that they would respond to any escalation against Iran, and now, 28 days into the American-Israeli campaign, they have made good on that threat. Their leader delivered a speech just hours before the missile launch, essentially declaring that Yemen was entering the war in solidarity with the Islamic Republic. This was a calculated, premeditated decision. What I find most alarming is the strategic implications of this development. Israel is now facing simultaneous threats from Iran to the east, Hezbollah to the north, and the Houthis to the south. This is exactly the multi-front war that Israeli defense planners have spent decades preparing for, and now it is actually happening. The Houthis possess an arsenal that should terrify anyone paying attention: ballistic missiles capable of reaching Tel Aviv, hypersonic weapons that can evade interception, and thousands of drones that have proven devastatingly effective against Saudi infrastructure. Let me remind you of what these fighters accomplished against the most advanced American air defenses. They struck Saudi Aramco facilities in 2019, temporarily cutting the kingdom's oil production by 50%. That attack demonstrated capabilities that exceeded what most Western intelligence agencies believed possible. And their arsenal has only grown more sophisticated since then. Iran has been systematically arming the Houthis for years, transferring ballistic missile technology, drone components, and the technical expertise to deploy these weapons with precision. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has embedded advisors and trainers throughout Houthi-controlled territory, creating a force that functions as an extension of Iranian military power. What makes the Houthis particularly dangerous is their geographic position. They control coastline along the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait, through which approximately 10% of global trade passes. If they decide to replicate their Red Sea campaign from 2023 and 2024, international shipping could face devastating disruptions at the worst possible moment. Consider the current situation. The Strait of Hormuz is already effectively closed by Iranian forces, with nearly 2,000 ships stranded and oil prices exceeding $100 per barrel. Now imagine the Houthis simultaneously blockading the Bab el-Mandeb. Global commerce would face a catastrophic double choke point that could trigger economic collapse in import-dependent nations. The United States launched Operation Rough Rider in mid-March, conducting intense airstrikes against Houthi positions across 7 Yemeni provinces in an attempt to degrade their capabilities. Those strikes killed dozens of Houthi fighters and targeted their missile systems, drone facilities, and leadership compounds, but clearly the campaign failed to eliminate their offensive capacity. Today's missile launch proves that despite weeks of American bombardment, the Houthis retain the ability to strike Israel whenever they choose. That is a sobering reality for military planners. The Israeli Air Force now faces an impossible geometry. They must simultaneously conduct operations over Iran, maintain air superiority against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and defend against Houthi missiles from Yemen. Each front demands significant resources: interceptor missiles, fighter aircraft, intelligence assets, and personnel. And Israel's military, while formidable, is not infinite. The Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems have performed remarkably throughout this conflict, but every interceptor fired represents millions of dollars and a finite stockpile being depleted. What happens when those stockpiles run low? That is the question keeping Israeli defense officials awake at night. Meanwhile, the human toll of this expanding conflict continues to mount. More than 3,000 people have been killed across the Middle East in just 28 days of fighting. In Iran alone, nearly 2,000. Civilians and military personnel have perished under American and Israeli bombardment. Entire neighborhoods in Tehran have been reduced to rubble. Israeli casualties now exceed 24 killed, with thousands wounded, and the psychological trauma of constant missile attacks is affecting millions of civilians on both sides. The economic devastation extends far beyond the battlefield. Global inflation is spiking, supply chains are fracturing, and nations dependent on Middle Eastern oil are facing energy crises. The Houthis entering this war will only accelerate these trends. Their proven willingness to target commercial shipping means insurance rates will skyrocket and maritime traffic will decline further. What I am witnessing is the unraveling of the post-World War II international order. The rules and institutions that governed conflict for decades are proving inadequate for this moment. President Trump has extended his deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by 10 days, claiming that negotiations are progressing well. But Tehran insists it is not backing down. The diplomatic track appears increasingly disconnected from the military reality on the ground. Bombs continue falling even as mediators shuttle between capitals. Pakistan has emerged as a key intermediary, relaying messages between Washington and Tehran, but the fundamental demands of both sides remain irreconcilable. America wants Iran to surrender control of the Strait of Hormuz, abandon its nuclear program, and accept regime change. Tehran demands reparations, sovereignty over its waters, and an end to the attacks. These positions are so far apart that meaningful compromise seems almost impossible, and meanwhile the killing continues. The Houthis joining the conflict eliminates any remaining hope for quick resolution. They have their own agenda, their own leadership, and their own timeline for this war. Even if Iran and America reached a ceasefire tomorrow, the Houthis might continue fighting independently. They have demonstrated that willingness before. This is the danger of proxy warfare. Once you arm and train militant groups, you cannot always control when or how they deploy that power. Iran built the Houthis into a regional force capable of threatening American allies, but Tehran may discover that their creation has ambitions beyond simply serving Iranian interests. The international community has responded to these developments with growing alarm. The United Nations Security Council convened emergency consultations. At Russia's request, European allies are pressing Washington for clarity on its Iran strategy, while the United Kingdom calls for a swift resolution to restore regional stability. But words and resolutions accomplish nothing when missiles are flying and civilians are dying. The time for diplomatic solutions may have already passed. What comes next is genuinely uncertain. The Houthis could escalate with additional missile barrages, or they might pause to gauge Israel's response before committing fully to the fight. Israel has promised forceful retaliation against Yemen. Defense Minister Israel Katz declared that strikes would hit wherever necessary to neutralize the Houthi threat. But the IDF is already stretched thin across multiple fronts. Opening yet another active campaign in Yemen would strain resources to the breaking point. The American military has assets positioned throughout the region: aircraft carriers, fighter squadrons, and thousands of troops deployed to protect allies and Project Power. But even the United States military has limits. The conflict is consuming Tomahawk cruise missiles at 9 times the annual procurement rate, and stockpiles are dwindling. This is the brutal arithmetic of modern warfare. Sophisticated weapons take years to manufacture but can be expended in days of intense combat. As I conclude this analysis, I want you to understand the magnitude of what we witnessed today. The Houthis firing that ballistic missile represents a point of no return. This conflict has metastasized from a targeted operation against Iranian nuclear facilities into a sprawling regional war with no clear endpoint and no obvious path to peace. The decisions made in the coming days will determine whether this war remains contained or spirals into something far more catastrophic, and right now, escalation appears more likely than de-escalation. This is exactly why Politique News exists, to help you understand how these global events are shaping the future of finance, power, and international stability in ways that will affect your life for decades to come. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and thank you for joining me tonight on Politique News.